Hello everybody and welcome to BiteSize Let's Talk Teenagers. So we are Emma Stevens and Chloe Pope from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy, and we're hoping that you will have been to maybe other sessions of ours or watched the introduction video, as we have just 20 minutes to tell you all we know about teenage relationships. And this is to try and help you ensure that your teenagers' first steps into relationships and intimacy are safe, healthy and fun. We do talk in this session about domestic abuse and sexual assault, so please don't watch if this may be difficult for you. You might be watching this session because it's part of many events during the 16 Days of Action promotion. This is a global call from organisations and individuals for an end to gender-based violence and for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. Throughout the 16 Days of Action this year, organisations in Devon are hosting a wide range of events and activities for you to get involved in, and we'll share the details with you at the end of tonight's session. So, why are we even here? Why do we need to have these conversations about teenagers and relationships? Well, we'd like you to just think back to your first relationship as a teenager or a young adult. Can you just remember how powerful and all-consuming those feelings were? And even for us as adults, love can be a tricky emotion. It gets tangled up with so many other feelings. And there are times when we all may have been a bit blinkered towards other people's faults in those early days. We really want our relationships to work. We want our partners to want us. And so sometimes we can overlook things that may be happening. And we always make compromises, don't we, in our relationships? However, your teenager has no markers. In a first relationship, there's no experience for them to reflect back on, and they may not be aware that this isn't how it always is or how it must be. So watching pornography at an early age is a really good example of this. Young people have seen scenarios on screen of sexual activity, and they think that that's how they must behave. That's what's expected of them. And this is huge pressure on both our boys and girls. Of course, in an ideal world, they'll have had perfect role modelling from you as the adults in their life. But even then, love can really blind them. And as your teenagers start engaging in these relationships, please bring up the topics of consent, healthy boundaries and respect. By talking about them regularly, rather than just that one big conversation, these conversations are going to become normalised in your house, and your young person will have a much better chance of enjoying healthy, safe and respectful relationships. We all know that being a carer or parent as a teenager is exhausting, but it can also be the most rewarding time. Our tiny humans are moving away from childhood into becoming adults, and that's both exciting and scary for you and them. Human nature within all of us means that we have this innate need to be loved, cared for and supported. And our children hopefully get all of that from us. But at a certain point when adolescence kicks in, they also need it from somewhere else. That peer acceptance becomes very important. How they look can make or break their day, and a look or a comment from someone they like or fancy can seem life-changing in that moment. We should never underestimate those first feelings that our teenagers have towards someone. Dismissing it as puppy love or a passing obsession is really dangerous. If you don't take them seriously, they'll find someone who will. So the message throughout all our sessions is to help keep your teenagers safe, you need to know them. Otherwise, how will you know when something isn't right? If you know who their friends are, you're going to recognise when a new name is mentioned or how they talk about a new person. And again, it's not about having that big one conversation. It's better to have an open door and just slot these talks in about their day and their life into your usual family routine. Try and listen when your teenager says something. It's easy to be distracted, isn't it, and nod along when not really listening, but you might not get another opportunity. Again, if you don't listen and take them seriously, someone else will. I guarantee you some of these conversations will be embarrassing for you and them, but they still need to be had. Many young people tell us about parents not really knowing their reality of their lives or being out of date, and they report much higher instances of sexual harassment, online sexual abuse and bullying than you as adults might be aware of. So we are going to look firstly tonight at what your teenagers may be subjected to every single day. Not what you might normally consider as domestic abuse or a crime. Maybe you think it's just part of life, but this is day-to-day reality for most of our teenagers. In 2020, government focus groups spoke to young people aged 13 to 17. and huge numbers of teenagers in this survey talked about sexual abuse. There are lots of different terms that you might hear that are used to talk about different sexual offences and forms of sexual violence, but the important thing to remember is if anyone does something sexual to another person without their consent, then it's sexual abuse, and this should always be taken seriously. Nearly 70% of our girls feel pressured to do sexual things that they don't want to do. They tell us that sexual harassment and online sexual abuse, such as being sent explicit videos and being pressured to send those nudes, are much more prevalent than adults realise. For example, nearly 90% of girls and 50% of boys said being sent explicit pictures or videos that they did not want to see happens a lot. Typical platforms for sharing these materials tend to be WhatsApp or Snapchat, and the teenagers talk about people being very persistent when asking for these images. They won't take no for an answer. And some explain that if you block them on social media, then the perpetrators just create multiple accounts to harass them. So if you remind your teenagers when you've been listening to this, it might be a good time to remind them that as soon as they press send on anything, they lose all control over what they've sent. So that nude photo that they might be sending to a boyfriend or girlfriend that they really trust can literally go anywhere. And it can turn up again in 6 months, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time. And girls we have spoken to are often frightened to even walk upstairs in certain part of a school as the boys sit under the stairs looking up their skirts taking photos. This is known as upskirting and is now a criminal offence. And imagine just for a second how this must feel to our teenagers. Would you want to go into a building knowing that this is going to happen? If it happens regularly and it's seen as a bit of a laugh, it really increases that sense of fear and entrapment because they feel unable to report the abuse and they might just begin avoiding school. And just remember here that words can have just as much impact as physical abuse, and it's often dismissed as banter, and young people are advised to get over it. Stop being such a Karen or such a snowflake. We're only having a laugh. We should be encouraging our teenagers to say, actually, that's not okay, and to report it. We've all been in difficult circumstances, I'm sure, when a joke has been told that doesn't sit well and we find offensive. We need to role model this bravery and start changing attitudes whenever we can, or it will never change for our young people. I'm not suggesting here that we don't have a sense of humour, just that we call out offensive, harming banter. Because the thing about banter is it's only funny if both parties find it funny. That seems like an obvious thing to say, but young people often confuse banter with abuse because they think the other person is their close friend. However, if your teenager is offended by or feels uncomfortable with something that is said to them, then it most certainly isn't banter, it's bullying. If someone says, don't be upset, it's just a bit of banter, it definitely isn't banter. And just think about some of the statements on screen now. Do your family use any of these expressions? And if you hear your teenager objectifying other people, remind them that those people they are talking about are human beings and not just sexual objects. Chloe.
Thank you, Emma, and hello, everyone. So I guess if I were to say the words domestic abuse, we'd all have a pretty similar picture in our heads. We might automatically think about physical violence occurring particularly within adult relationships. But the reality is domestic abuse is much, much more than that. Domestic abuse can, of course, happen to anyone of any age, gender, religion, class, or ethnicity. But young people aged between 13 and 24 are the highest risk group. But also, according to the statistics, it's still more likely that your child will experience a healthy relationship instead of an unhealthy relationship. However, the fact that you are here listening means that you are aware of some of the dangers and risks and want to help keep your young person safe. It might not necessarily happen to your young person, but you might notice those warning signs in what they tell you about their friends' relationships, for example. Domestic abuse is often hidden, and there really is a huge, huge stigma around it. So again, opening that conversation at home can be helpful to start breaking that taboo down and helping your young person to engage in these open and honest conversations. The power and control wheel, which is now on your screen, can help us to understand this definition of domestic abuse further. It's not easy to see on your screen, so do take a photo and enlarge it. So these different sections of the wheel can help us to understand how someone could gain power and control over another person. I won't go through all of these with you, but think it is important to touch on the ones that are most prevalent in our young people's relationships. So let's start with using intimidation. So this really means using scary behaviour that would leave someone feeling fearful, walking on eggshells, or scared to put a foot wrong. This can be something as simple as the way that they look at the other person, to more serious things like damaging the property, smashing things, or throwing objects around, such as a phone at the wall. Then we have sexual persuasion. So this is about manipulating, coercing, or making threats to get someone to do something sexually that they don't want to do, making someone feel bad or guilty for not wanting to do something. The if you loved me, you would, or everyone else is okay with it. Getting someone drunk to lower inhibitions and force them to have sex also falls into this category. You cannot consent to something if you are drunk. Often abusers in relationships will constantly be using the word love to justify their actions or their behaviours. And then we have anger or emotional abuse up the top there. Potentially the most common type of abuse. 91% of people who have been in an abusive relationship report there to have been some form of emotional abuse. Emotional abuse includes things like put downs, name calling, and playing mind games. Emotional abuse is often also referred to as psychological abuse and can fall under the category of verbal abuse. Then we have isolation. So isolation is also commonly seen in abusive relationships. In terms of young people's relationships, this will often involve them making the other partner feel bad for seeing their friends, for example. However, remember that within teenage relationships, it's often very normal for them to want to spend all of their time with their new partner, especially if that relationship is new. Isolation is different here because there'll be some level of fear involved. The victim in the relationship would likely feel scared as to what would happen if they didn't spend all of their time with that one particular person. Then we have using coercion and threats. So this involves more of a pattern of behaviours rather than one-off incidents. The pattern normally results in the abusive behaviour getting worse as time goes on and can leave that victim to feel trapped. Commonly in young people, we tend to see the threat of suicide. That if the victim ends the relationship, then the abusive person will threaten to end their own life, which is obviously a huge pressure on that other young person in the relationship. Other behaviours here can include threats, either making them or carrying them out, such as the threat to share nude pictures or spread rumours about them. So let's watch a very short clip now, which you might have seen in our previous sessions or on the TV. It highlights the behaviours that I've just spoke about in teenage abusive relationships and just how quickly they can escalate.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought so.
So, do you want a bit of fun before your parents get back?
Doing what?
You know, just a bit of fun.
No, let's just watch this.
Oh, come on. I'll tell everyone you're frigid.
Well, why would you do that?
Well, you basically are being now.
Well, no, not really, because we've already done it.
Yeah, but you said we would tonight. Then you dragged me over here and now you say it's not
Well,
happening.
let's just watch this, all right? I don't remember Mum's going to be back. No, I don't want
Oi.
it. No, I don't want it.
How about a cuddle?
What always happens at the end of a cuddle?
Well, who's that?
Nicole?
Oh, you and your mates.
What are you doing?
That's your fault, that.
I've only just got this.
Don't talk to me like that. And anyway, why are you talking to Nicole? You know I don't like her.
So I'm not even allowed friends now. I'm
I thought I was your mate. Get off
Please just let go of me. You really hate me.
Look at you. You're pathetic. Leave her alone.
Please, can you just let go of me, all right?
No, what are you doing?
I'll do it.
You're going to have to put some work in to get me ready now. Well, go on then. Show me something.
So did you?
Okay, so quite a hard-hitting clip there. Only a minute and a half long, and we have seen a number of things happening there. We saw pressure to have sex. We saw threats to tell others that she's frigid if she didn't have sex. We saw isolation from friends when she said she had a text from Nicole and then him talking negatively of Nicole. We saw intimidation by him throwing her phone, and we saw physical abuse from the hair pulling. We saw emotional abuse by the name calling, such as calling her pathetic, all of which link back to the power and control wheel and highlight how complex abusive relationships really can be, involving several different behaviours. All those pressures and concerns just within a 90-second clip. Try sharing that one with your teenagers and hear their view. I also want to tell you about Lucy and Jack. Lucy and Jack are both 16 and they've been dating for a year. And they get invited to a party. Jack feels unwell that evening, so Lucy goes alone. Lucy has a lot to drink. She gets very drunk and ends up kissing someone that they both know, witnessed by a lot of people at the party. It only lasts a few minutes and then she leaves the situation. She tells Jack about it as soon as she sees him the next day, and Jack punches her in the face. Just think for a minute about your reaction to this scenario, both as a parent to Lucy and as a parent to Jack. And if you can put yourself in Lucy or Jack's position, and maybe pose a question to your teenager. We're going to say categorically that there is never ever any reason for a human to use physical abuse against another person. The majority of teenagers experiencing this kind of abuse never tell anyone about their experience. On average, an adult victim of domestic abuse will experience over 20 abusive incidents before they tell anyone. Please don't let embarrassment stop you from asking your young person about their relationship. Emma.
It's Chloe. So, domestic abuse and sexual harassment or assault all involve people pushing or even totally disregarding the boundaries that our young people have, just like we saw from that clip there. However, how do we really know that our young people fully understand what these boundaries are, how to have them, and how to respect other people's boundaries? So under this category of boundaries falls this major factor about consent. So consent is often thought of as a very, very challenging term to define, especially when it comes to sex relationships. But does it need to be? So I know that when I think about consent, I think about all those consent forms that we have to fill out about how services use our data, etc. But let's get real here. We never enter relationships asking the other person to sign consent that they will love, respect and support us. We just expect that to happen. And the same goes for sex. Our young people are not signing forms to agree to have sex with another person. But what differentiates abuse and assault from having a good time is the concept and practice of consent. So consent needs to be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic and specific. So consent needs to be able to be withdrawn at any time. It also has to be given without any level of coercion and without any sign of impaired judgment, so being drunk. Coercion is what we've just talked about: force, harassment, intimidation, arguing, insistence, pressure, threats, etc. And when we talk about that impaired judgment, we're not only talking about being drunk or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, but also about hesitation, confusion, or just being in a frame of mind where consent cannot be reasonably given. So this is a good time to be clear with your teenagers that the absence of the word no does not mean yes. A maybe does not mean yes. And a no is not a yes. So consent can be black and white. Either they have it to give or they don't. And remind them that even when they have consent, it can be revoked at any time. Yes, even if they've already started. For example, their partner wants to have sex and so do they. Great. There must be a conversation about what type of sex and what protection will be involved. Because actually, if your teenagers can't have a conversation about that, they probably shouldn't be doing it at all. Because if they're thinking that it's awkward to have that conversation, wait until they figure out they've crossed a boundary because they felt too embarrassed not to have that conversation. Now, what could have been a really great time has been ruined by not being informed about what you are actually consenting to. So there is a great consent video online called The Cup of Tea. Try and watch this with your teenager. It just sums up what we've talked about. Put Cup of Tea consent into YouTube and it will come up. There are also ones for younger children in your family too. But just be mindful that if you don't click the clean version, you're going to hear lots of great language. So tell your teenagers that if they feel like their or their partner's boundaries have been violated or something has happened without their consent, they can always talk to you about it. So reassure them that you won't blame them. It doesn't matter if they weren't where they said they were or they've been drinking alcohol. You are not there to victim blame or pass judgment at this point. The main thing here is that your teenager is trusting you enough to share. So you need to make sure that they're listened to, that they're believed, and they're offered any support that they're asking you for. It's incredibly difficult to see someone you care about being treated in a bad way. But if you start these conversations early, your children will be brought up to expect better and they will share any difficult situations with you. It can also be really useful to talk to your teenager about which other trusted adults they can speak to with a problem if they feel too embarrassed or awkward talking to you. Check with them, if something happens and you can't talk to me, who are you going to go to? At the end of this session, we're also going to share some support services with you that your teenager and you can use. Reach out to them because many of them have some great anonymous advice. Chloe.
Thank you, Emma. So whilst you can't wrap your teenager up in cotton wool, you can look at safety planning with them, helping them to avoid or get out of those dangerous situations. Lots of your teenagers now will meet people online and don't always know much about them when they first meet up. Or they're going to go out to have a lot of unsupervised parties at this age. So let's have a quick look at some of the basics. You may already do a lot of these things, but it's good to just remind yourselves of them. So make sure that when your young people leave the house, they always have their mobile phone on them, and most importantly, that it's fully charged. The one time they need to use their phone is bound to be that time that it's dead. So portable chargers are also really handy. Make it a rule in your house that your teenagers are only allowed out with their fully charged phone. It's also so important that we have a rough idea of where our young people are going, where they're planning on being and who they will be with. It's also good to get a rough idea on what time they're planning on returning or when you want them home by. They might not be honest with you, of course they might not be. I'm sure we can all remember a time that we've lied to our parents as teenagers, but it still really is worth an ask. It also creates that open environment of us being curious as parents and encouraging those discussions around staying safe. Again, it's helpful if you have been able to meet and know people in their friendship groups. And even maybe their parents. Knowledge definitely is power when it comes to teenagers. Lots of apps and phones have location trackers on them, sometimes abused by perpetrators, but a good resource for parents. Again, in the early teenage years, you could make the sharing of their location a condition of you paying their phone bill. Think about the Life 360 app. This is a family location sharing device. Some families have found this to be really useful. Just Google Life 360. Snapchat maps may also be helpful, or Find My iPhone if you're on Apple. And encourage them to leave any situation if they feel unsafe and have a plan of what to do next. We live in Devon. We know that our young people tend to hang around or have parties in fields or at the beach. So what can they do if they want to leave but have nowhere other to go other than the next field or the field after that? Well, this is where a secret emergency phrase between the both of you can be really, really helpful. This phrase can be used if your young person can't talk in front of others and need you to come and get them or need your help. Think about those really everyday phrases like, when are you walking the dog? How's Auntie Susie? Are we still going to see Grandma tomorrow? You both know that this really means come and get me or I need your help, but none of their friends have to know what this really means. Being able to get home and not having to rely on someone else is also incredibly important. So think about encouraging that conversation in advance. How will they get home from their friend's house? How will they get home from a party? Can the timetables for the local bus or train or the numbers for the local taxi be added as a photo in their phones, for example, when they might not have access to data or Wi-Fi? Think about them having some spare cash, a tenner, in the back of their wallet or phone case, and that can come in really handy when there's absolutely no other transport options other than a bus or a taxi. However, we know that for some of our young people, walking home will be the only or the best option for them. So again, safety plan around this before they go out. Talk about keeping to well-lit streets, planning the route and sharing this with someone, not accepting lifts from unknown or unregistered cabs. Wearing shoes you can walk in and having hands-free. We all know that there's safety in numbers, so help them to recognise the importance of walking home and encourage a group of peers, or at least with another friend, and always encourage this. There is also a great phone line called Strut Safe, where someone will stay on the phone to you whilst you walk home, a good one to know about for emergencies. And if they are out in a town or city somewhere, Ask Angela is a good initiative run by some councils, including Torbay. It works by licensed premises displaying an Ask for Angela poster on their window. And that really signals that that pub, club, restaurant or bar is signed up to the scheme. In those premises, staff know to act, that if someone approaches a member of staff to ask to speak to Angela. So if your young person is being harassed, on a bad date, or just in a situation that makes them feel uncomfortable, they can go to that bar, ask to speak to Angela. It looks like they're ordering a drink, but the staff will know that this means that they need to get to safety. Does your teenager know this? And is this something that maybe you could share with them? Making a safety plan together for if something goes wrong, especially when drugs and alcohol are involved, is a really good idea. For example, if they're at a party or a festival and another teenager passes out, remind them how important it is that they do call for help, and most importantly, that they will not be in trouble if an ambulance is needed to be called. Sadly, a lot of deaths linked to drugs especially could have been prevented if help was called upon sooner, which often teenagers are scared to do because of those potential repercussions. Never underestimate the power of peer pressure on an otherwise sensible teenager. Let them know that you will be there to support them no matter what happens. They need your support even when they are rejecting it. And finally, think about role modelling. Role model how you stay safe yourself. You might be going on a night out or round a friend's house for a few drinks soon. Let your young person see you planning on how you're going to get home, booking that taxi, talking to your partner about picking you up. Role model how important safety is, especially on nights out and at parties when our inhibitions are lowered. Talk to them about one of your groups being the responsible driver or adult and not drinking, and the importance of this. So we've reached the end of the session tonight. So on your screen now are just a few further support options. Please do reach out to these services if any of what we've discussed today has impacted you, or you're worried that it may be impacting on your teenager. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in one of our other clips.
Thank you, Chloe. Oh my goodness, 20 minutes isn't long, is it? We've talked a lot of things through with you tonight, but there's much more information in our Teenagers Toolkit, details of which are on the Safer Devon website. Do take a look. There's lots of things in there that you can share with your teenagers, and other sessions in this Let's Talk series will be available soon, including talking about mental health and community risks. Do follow Chloe and I on social media, as we do often share tips, strategies and upcoming events. And Safer Devon on their website have all the information you need about the very important and impactful 16 days of action. And finally, please remember that your love, your nurture and your guidance will set your young people up for most things. Pop upstairs, knock on their door, put your head in and just say hi. Ask for a 20-second hug, which will truly release lots of those feel-good hormones, instantly making you both feel better. Thank you so much for listening. You've got this.